I have not done a content-specific episode in a while. And so I decided that I really wanted to, over the next course of this year, create space for one episode for each of my core 4 courses that just kind of gives an overview and background of the scope and sequence that I cover in each course, and really dive deep into how I chose my sequences for each of these courses and why I prioritize what I prioritize, and just decided upon my scope, whether I went more into the breadth or more into the depth or tried to do it all. So I'm hoping that these episodes will be informative, and especially this one specifically for anyone considering using the It's Not Rocket Science anatomy curriculum, or if just you teach anatomy or are about to start teaching anatomy or might teach it next year, and you're trying to decide what to cover and what order and how to best go about doing it. I think this will be a helpful episode for you. Now, if you do not teach anatomy, I think you might still find hearing about my thought process helpful, specifically if you teach another elective science course, because I think a lot of this would kind of transfer to other elective sciences. Now, I think when we get to biology and chemistry and physical science in future episodes, next year, that may not translate as well, but we'll see when we get there. So I'm excited though today to talk to you about anatomy, how and why I teach it the way I do. So let's get to it. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First, I want to talk about how anatomy is uniquely special, and different compared to the other 3 courses I've written, and why it is that way. And it's because it's an elective course. There are no real standards that are specific to anatomy. Now, the next generation science standards do, of course, in that life science bubble, have things that apply to anatomy. Absolutely. And there are some states that have specific standards, which I really appreciated. I honestly found those incredibly helpful because I'm type A. I like a guideline. I like a guardrail. And so I found those really informative, and I did my best when I was writing my curriculum to cover as many state standards as I possibly could. But I really just enjoyed the freedom that the lack of standards overall in most states, it just gave me so much creativity that I could explore as I wrote this curriculum, and really thought about what I felt would be best for students, and not having to fit everything into this box, check the box saying I taught every single standard, because most of the states don't have standards for this. So when I thought about the students who typically sign up for anatomy and physiology in the schools I've taught in, most of them have some sort of interest in the medical field. If not, they would pick a different science to get that extra science credit they might need to graduate in our state. And so if this is truly the case, if these students tend to have some interest in some sort of medical field, they are going to take anatomy and physiology again in college. This is not a curriculum for like an AP or IB level course. This is not a dual credit course. This is for like an elective anatomy and physiology course. It's not going to give them college credit or, postgraduate credit in whatever studies they have. They're going to have to take another. And so because of this, I decided very intentionally to shift the focus of my course from what a lot of people, I feel like, write anatomy curriculum for. Instead of creating a course in a curriculum where students are prioritizing memorizing all of these different structures so that they're prepared when they get to college, I wanted to create a course that really focused on stoking the fire of their interest for the human body. Because I know that if students are still interested in something, then they're more likely to stay the course going into that medical field that they're interested in. And I figured, how much of what they memorize here will they really retain in 1 to 4 years when they take an anatomy and physiology class again in, post-secondary education? And so I figured, why spend all this time and energy working on memorization? I can leave that for the college professors and make the focus of my course more on the physiology and the 3 themes that I'm going to address in a minute. So I do think my course is a little bit more physiology heavy than anatomy heavy, but if you're listening, you're a science teacher, and particularly if you're a life science teacher, that form dictates function. So the two go hand in hand. And this idea is a central theme that's threaded throughout each unit in this curriculum. It really focuses on the body as a whole rather than each of these individual parts divided among these organ systems. And so that led to just totally impacting the entire organization of the curriculum, which I'll talk about in a minute. But really, I wanted to focus on how they work together and functional themes rather than individual systems. Also, I wanted to really build on what I teach my students in Biology 1, which is such a huge emphasis on homeostasis, and really expand on, homeostatic failures, because that's not something we have as much time to get into in Biology 1, and what happens when homeostasis fails and how the body responds to that. And so that kind of desire for that to be the number one goal led into there being 3 themes that really should be very obvious if you're using my resources. One is that form dictates function, like I mentioned. We're never really memorizing a structure just for the sake of memorizing. We're only looking at something and how it's designed and how the different cells and tissues work together so that we can understand its function and what it does. Number 2, how the body works together as one unit with many interacting parts. We're constantly building each unit on what was previously taught upon and trying to weave those themes together. And then 3, how all of these parts, like we said, work together to maintain homeostasis. And that if there is a failure to maintain homeostasis, those issues affect multiple body systems. They never just are affecting one thing. I think this holistic nature of exploring the human body is extremely timely now to kind of where we are in society and the way a lot of people are really starting to understand, what I eat impacts my hormones, which impacts this, which impacts that. It's all so much more integrated. I think people have a much greater interest in integrative medicine than we definitely had when I was growing up and when I took anatomy in high school. And so all of that, those themes and that idea, that rationale, that impacted how I decided upon my sequence and scope. So I really said, I want this to be big picture focused. Like I said, we're not wasting a ton of time memorizing a ton of things and knowing every single tissue type and getting really into the histology. I want the number one goal to be every student who takes my anatomy course or sits in another teacher's anatomy course using my It's an Rocket Science Anatomy curriculum. I want them to be absolutely fascinated by how epic the human body is. I care more about that, their fascination and their interests, than I care about prepping them for nursing school or medical school or trade school that has kind of a medical component to that. Now, again, will some go on to be medical professionals, EMTs, whatever it may be? Of course. And like I said, there's plenty of other courses they will take where they will be memorizing those. But I think getting them to fall in love, to me, I care so much more about that big picture than the small details in this course. And I feel differently about other courses I've written, which I'll talk about when I get to those episodes in future months since I'm spreading these out. But I really care about breadth more than I care about depth and big picture. And that's why I tell everyone all the time, if they're running short on time in my curriculum, I would rather you cut things and go less deep so that you can get through every single system than not. Because as many people do, I teach reproductive systems at the end of the year. A lot of reasons for that. One of which being, I do think there is a comfort and a trust level and a rapport with students that teaching at the end of the year works better because you've gotten to know each other so well, and you with the parents as well. I also think it's such an excellent way to wrap up a year in anatomy because every single body system we've learned about throughout the year is attached to the reproductive system and the growing of this human being. So it's just a great culmination of everything we learned. So I love it at the end of the year. And I find that so many teachers don't get to it because of a lack of time, and they spend so much time going into depth on these other things. They spend a whole semester on skeletal and muscular systems, and they never even get to reproductive, which is arguably the one that students need to know the most about because it affects their day-to-day lives more than knowing every single one of the 206 bones in their body's names. Like, students understanding how the menstrual cycle works is more important than them being able to articulate the composition of skeletal muscle tissue, okay? Or like the long bone. I mean, again, maybe hot takes, but I feel really, really passionate about that. I think it's so important. And you could argue, well, then just teach reproduction at the beginning of the year. You totally could. I just know how uncomfortable it would feel as a teacher talking to virtual strangers in my classroom about reproduction and not knowing their parents, not being able to show who I am as a teacher to earn that trust from parents. Also, how uncomfortable it might feel as a student to be sitting under the instruction of a teacher I barely know, and they're talking to me about all these very personal, make my cheek blush kind of topics. It lends itself so much better to me for the end of the year. So that's why I'll say that I do reproduction at the end. Now, like I said, big picture is so important to me. So when it comes to the sequence, I like to group the systems together, looking at their major overarching function. So of course, all these systems have many roles, but like I like to do the themes again, so that everything we do, even the structure of the units in the It's in Rocket Science Anatomy curriculum, point to the big picture and those three themes I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. So for example, I teach skeletal and muscular systems and movement and joints all together in a support and motion unit. And then the nervous and endocrine systems, as well as senses, are all taught together in a control and coordination unit. I think it's insane to teach the nervous system isolated and not endocrine right with it, because both of them are so essential for control and coordination. I do cardiovascular and respiratory systems in my transport unit, which that one you could have put potentially lymphatic in it as well, but I did save it, and I'll explain why in a minute. I do digestive and urinary, and we talk about nutrition in the absorption and excretion unit. What goes in has to come out unit is my favorite way to think of it. And then integumentary, immune, and lymphatic, I teach in my protection unit. I know a lot of people do integumentary at the beginning of the year, but integumentary is kind of like reproduction in that there's so much that goes into integumentary that connects to all these other systems that to me, it's better to be used kind of at the end as a culmination. And seeing that like your skin is this like first boundary, it's the first line of defense in your immune system. Like that is so important to me that they have that kind of big picture connected to like immune and lymphatic, which are a lot harder to see and understand. Putting them all together in protection to me makes the most sense. Now, I do have a first unit in Intro to Anatomy, but I don't do a huge detailed review of biochemistry and a bunch of biology things, knowing that most students have always taken Biology 1. I don't know any school that lets you take anatomy before Biology 1. And then a lot of students also love taking chemistry. So I was like, I'm not going to spend a lot of valuable time reviewing when we could just kind of dive in, and if we need to supplement and review as we go, that's something we can do. So that is how I decided upon how to arrange the systems, how to teach them. And I hope that makes sense and is clear why I care more about the breadth than the depth. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not doing a ton of hands-on, fun, interesting learning experiences, and we absolutely are. So I want to talk also and share with you about what I think makes It's Not Rocket Science Anatomy unique. And of course, this is in my opinion, from my perspective. I obviously don't own every curriculum on the market, so I can't compare. But I can compare mine to like every textbook curriculum I've ever been distributed and promptly dismissed, okay? So first is that I love to write curriculum for teachers who teach in settings like I have experience in, which is no science budget, very limited equipment. So anything I'm designing and sharing with you guys, they all use limited materials and materials that can be reused. If they are consumables, things that are easily purchased like at your grocery store or Amazon. Now, I know there are exceptions to that, but like dissections, which we'll talk about in a second, but that is what my primary focus is because that's what my experience is. So I'm picturing myself in my old classroom with no running water, and how would I do this lab? How would I teach this content? That is the perspective I come to it with. So because of that, there aren't a lot of the traditional labs you might see in an anatomy class, but there's a lot of model building and things like that, and maybe not as many of the wet labs, but there are dissections. But I always make sure with something like dissections, that's an investment. Like if you're going to do dissections with your students, it's an investment. there's always alternative options there if that's not in your budget, and students can still have some great learning experiences without doing the dissection. Of course, I think the dissections are so special. The curriculum, I include mammal heart, sheep brain, and fetal pig. And then I link some options for some other things. Like if you want to do a chicken wing, if you want to do an eye as like extensions, that's one thing I really love about this curriculum. I have a differentiation guide that comes with each bundle I write that I've added in this past year. All of my curricula come with CP, so college prep or on grade level resources, and honors or advanced. But in that differentiation guide, I outline ways you can make the honors resources even more challenging and extended, and then simplify the CP even further. And for anatomy, there's just so many excellent extension opportunities, and I link a ton of them, like articles you can read and extra projects, extra dissections, that kind of thing. So if you want to get more into the depth, you can. Additionally, I've never had a textbook. So something unique about It's Not Rocket Science resources is I write all curricula in a way that you can do them without access to a textbook. I think what makes this curriculum really special all my It's Not Rocket Science curricula are really hands-on and student-centered, but this one just has an extra level of intentionality that I'm obsessed with. I've never done as much research for a curriculum that I've written than I did for this one. I interviewed medical professionals. I read countless books. I've watched so many videos and documentaries, and I've just tried to tie in as many real-world examples as I could because, again, I wanted the number one goal to be their fascination with this content and with the human body. There's just so many opportunities for practical application. So I include those whenever possible, like teaching students the basics of CPR and how to make a tourniquet and how to take blood pressure in the transport unit. And I tell you in the differentiation guide and in the teacher notes, like, hey, this is such a cool opportunity to partner with your local fire department and see if they can bring in EMTs and do a CPR class for your students. Like, so many cool ways you can bring in the community, bring in guest speakers to this course. Like, and if this is an elective, let's have fun with it. And that's another reason why I don't want to go into as much depth, because I want to have more space to do some of these add-on things that I would never have had the time to do in my biology class with an EOC. Also, what makes this curriculum really cool is my sister is a vascular surgeon, and so I brought her in to help me film the behind-the-scenes videos that come with every dissection that is included. So I don't know about you, if you've ever taught anatomy or if this is your first time, or maybe the first time you taught anatomy for years, but you're going to do dissections for the first time. But doing a dissection for the first time with students is very intimidating. So I include pictures, labeled pictures that you can use as kind of like an answer key if you want, or just for your own instruction, or you can share them with your students for the dissections and what parts are what and that kind of thing. But I also film these behind the scenes videos of each dissection with my sister, the surgeon. So I put on a GoPro on my forehead and I dissected each of the specimens that are included in this curriculum. And my sister just added commentary, and it was so helpful. These are not for your students. These are for you. But just to get her insights as a medical professional and pointing things out and kind of discovering things alongside her as we dissected. It was, truly like a live, unedited video, I think is such a valuable resource that comes with this curriculum. And she just has so many fun facts and stuff she shares in her career that then you can borrow and share with your students. And then my other favorite thing about that with the intentionality is just all of the ways that students get to learn about diseases and disorders throughout each unit. Because like we said, one of the 3 themes is looking at homeostatic failures and how a failure to maintain homeostasis impacts multiple body systems. Like, my students just love to learn about these topics. And so making sure they're integrated in every unit in some way just engages students so much. And so I promise your students will not be bored by this content if you choose to do the same as well. The last thing I want to mention is just how student-centered this anatomy curriculum is. And that's really for 2 reasons. First is that my memories of high school anatomy involve a lot of notes and a lot of labeling diagrams from textbooks. And so I wanted to avoid both of those things as I wrote my anatomy curriculum. And that's when I started creating big body diagrams and discovery stations, which I will link in the show notes because they are available a la carte. But essentially, these big body diagrams are large diagrams. The way you print them is on 2 pieces of typing paper. And then I teach you how to tape them together and then fold them so that they can be in a student's binder, and then they can fold them out, have this giant body diagram. And students use these and they walk around the classroom. They have these discovery stations where each station helps them discover a part of the body system that's on their big body diagram. So there'll be anywhere from 6 to 10 stations as they explore different structures within a system. So they move to these stations, they read them, they might watch a video, they label the parts on their big body diagram that they're learning about. And then they also have some questions in their packet of student handouts that they answer to make sure they're getting the relevant information that they need. And these stations are beautiful. They're so colorful and engaging. Each set took me a full week to create. They're just very labor intensive, but I just think they're really special because they get students out of their seats. They're moving around the classroom. They're learning information themselves rather than just having me spew it at them. They're not using technology, so they're getting off of their phones, but at the same time, they're not just sitting at their desk reading a textbook. And they're getting to do all these different pieces. They're reading, they're labeling, they're making connections, they're answering application questions. And it's just a really effective way to decrease lecture and increase some of their student autonomy. Now, of course, there are lectures, and I have lecture videos on my YouTube channel that anyone can use, even if you don't use my resources. They're all up there. They're not private or anything. So it also gives teachers who are new to anatomy a chance to learn some of the content before they teach it. So all of that is there. But I think the other thing that makes this curriculum really student-centered, not just the fact that, you could flip your classroom and students watch the lectures and take the notes themselves, and not just the discovery stations, but it's that I knew that this is an upperclassman course most of the time. And so that gave me a lot of opportunities to push students to do a lot of independent skills. Like there are a lot of independent research activities, group projects where they're having to collaborate and communicate together, orally, visually, written. And so I think these types of resources really strengthen skills that will serve them for years outside of their time in the classroom. And so I just love the life skills they are learning through this curriculum because the focus is so much more about what they're experiencing in the class and not how fast you can get through how much content and cover all these things as deep as possible. But truly that big picture focus is why I'm really obsessed with it and I love it so much. So if you are interested in the It's Not Rocket Science anatomy curriculum, this hopefully gave you a lot of context for how I wrote it and why. Another thing that would really help you would be if you wanted to download my free pacing guide. Anyone can use this. It's at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/anatomy-guide, and I'll link it in the show notes. But all you have to do is put in your email address and I'll send it to you. And it has a breakdown of each unit, the topics I cover in it, the instructional resources I use, and how long I spend on each topic. So it's a really helpful guide if you're trying to figure out pacing of your own course. And if you teach a different elective course that's not anatomy and you want to know how do I think about my sequence and the themes and the best way to arrange the topics, then I highly recommend you go back and listen to episode 80. It's all about strategizing your sequence for your course. And I'll walk you through 10 questions I ask myself when I come up with my sequences, and that'll hopefully be a helpful resource for you. You can find the show notes with that pacing guide, with my bundle, with the discovery stations, with that episode 80, all of that linked for you in one place at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 209. And if you have not left a review for the podcast yet, I would love it if you left a review if you are an anatomy teacher. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.